Well, back to our study in Acts chapter 22, verses 26 through 30, and actually into chapter 23, with verses 1 through 5. We kind of ended our last study with a big oops when they discovered that the Apostle Paul was a Roman citizen and that they had been beating him and had him in chains. And so we pick up in this situation where suddenly the centurion who had been getting ready to flog Paul asked that question, is it legal for you to beat a man who hasn't even been found guilty in court? Suddenly they knew he was a citizen. So we pick up at verse 26 in chapter 22. When the centurion heard this about Paul being a Roman citizen, he went to the commander and reported it. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "This man is a Roman citizen." Now, Roman citizenship could be either bought if you had enough money and built up enough prestige in the community. You could buy Roman citizenship and become part of the first class, the upper class, or you could be born into it. And Paul, as a child called Saul, was born into a Roman citizen family. His mother and father were citizens, and therefore he was born as a citizen of Rome. It had special privileges. It had first-class treatment, and they moved among themselves, and everybody else was of a lower caste. They had total freedom of movement, full rights before the law, and freedom from most of the taxes. So the commander had to react. I mean, here he is now stuck in a kind of an impasse. And so in verse 27 we read, "The commander went to Paul and asked, 'Tell me, are you a Roman citizen?' Paul said, 'Yes, I am.' Then the commander said, 'I had to pay a lot of money for my citizenship.' And Paul shot right back at him, 'But I was born a citizen.'" This apple cart was about to be spilt. I'm sure there were some quick intakes of breath by those who heard Paul being mistreated and maybe took part in it. I'm sure they took a quick intake of breath, because you don't mess with a Roman citizen if you are not yourself a Roman citizen and you're from some other of the colonial people that had been conquered by Rome. You just didn't mess with Roman citizens. Verse 29, those who were about to interrogate him withdrew immediately. I mean, talk about getting scared. I'm out of here. I'm not going to get involved in this. He's a Roman citizen. We've got to be careful. The commander himself was alarmed, it says in verse 29, when he realized that he had put Paul, a Roman citizen, in chains. The commander felt himself in a very uncomfortable position. Who in the world and who can help me get out of this? I've made a mess for myself, and yet I had to stop that riot. What could I do? I don't know what to do. I guess he slept on it. In fact, it says it took him a while to figure out how to handle this predicament. So in verse 30 we read, the commander wanted to find out exactly why Paul was being accused by the Jews. So the next day he released him and ordered the chief priests and all the members of the Sanhedrin to assemble. Then he brought Paul and had him stand before them. Now the Sanhedrin, of course, was the ruling court of the Jews and of Judaism. They had the final word when it came to religious matters and matters of law within the religion. They had the final word. And here they were with Saul, probably one of one of the members of the Sanhedrin himself before he was converted to Christ. He was a highly positioned man, Paul, before he found Jesus, or Jesus found him on the road to Damascus. I can imagine the memory of the crucifixion of Jesus was still remembered by the Sanhedrin. It had only been 22 years previous to this, because this particular incident we're reading about in the Bible right now happened in May or June in the year AD 55, just 22 years after Jesus was crucified. So some of them remembered that. Some of them were there. The new high priest had been appointed by Rome. I mean, usually the priesthood was passed on father to son and kept in the priestly family in line. But the new high priest had been appointed by Rome as a way of control. Several changes had taken place, and I'm not sure whether Paul was unaware of this, but he probably didn't recognize who was the priest that had ordered him to be slapped and beaten. You know, Paul himself might well have been remembered as the man who was assigned to go to Damascus and catch Christians and bring them back and put them in prison. They were standing there in that same Sanhedrin. Some may have died off, others had joined, but some of them certainly were part of the Sanhedrin when Paul was active and on his way to persecute Christians in Damascus. Politically, the high priest at that time colluded with those who would lead the rebellion of the Jews in 66, just 11 years to come. And he played up to the Romans because he was appointed by them. But as he played his part, he found himself in some pretty tough situations himself. I'm quite certain Paul was looking into the well-known eyes of some of his former friends in the Sanhedrin. Then in Acts chapter 23, verses 1 through 5, we read this. Paul looked straight at the Sanhedrin. He looked them right in the eyes. My brothers, I have fulfilled my duty to God in all good conscience to this day. At this, the high priest Ananias ordered those standing near Paul to strike him on the mouth. Wow. Then Paul said to him, God will strike you, you whitewashed wall. You sit there and judge me according to your law, yet you yourself violate the law by commanding that I be struck. Paul was not about to take all this just sitting down. He threw the law right back in their faces. You see, Ananias was the high priest appointed by Herod Agrippa. Now, this Herod Agrippa, his official name was Marcus Julius Agrippa, and he was the last of the Herodian line of rulers in the Jewish nation. Things were coming to an end, but many people had no idea that it was. And I'm sure many in the Sanhedrin had no idea that 11 years from now, the rebels of Jerusalem would rebel against the Rome. Things were confusing, just as they are in our political scenery here in Canada and around the world. Things are very confusing. You don't know what to believe. You don't know who's telling the truth. And those standing near Paul said, "How dare you insult God's priest?" As if, he had some spiritual superiority. Positionally, he had a high authority, the high priest. But was he any different from any other man or woman or child? No, we're equal before God. We're equal before the law. But they said, "How dare you insult God's high priest?" And Paul replied, "Brothers, I did not realize that he was the high priest, for it is written, 'Do not speak evil about the ruler of your people.'" And so here he was in a situation where there was a lot of tension. And Paul's future was on the line right now. They'd had a big oops in suddenly realizing that he was a Roman citizen. Now here he is ending up trying to solve the commander's problem by being judged by the Jews. Paul was ready to jump in with both feet. And remember this, Paul was very, very highly educated in both Jewish and Roman law. Our next study will just show how resourceful Paul was, both intellectually and in debate. And as we finish this study, once in a while, you and I may face a situation where somebody will actually strike us or knock us down or try to get at us some way because we're Christians. And I have a strong sense within me that we are in those days when many of those things are going to begin to happen more openly, more brazenly. But you and I as Christians, either we're in or we're out. There will become a dividing of the sheep and the goats. And I trust that you will stand firm in Jesus Christ and stand firmly on his word and keep the faith that God has put in your heart. Trust in him. He's always with you. He's promised never to leave us or forsake us. And I trust he won't forsake you as you take your stand for Christ, as Paul is doing right now in this account written by Luke the physician. I trust you'll have a wonderful day, and that you'll know the presence of Jesus, and that you'll take some time to spend in prayer, because in prayer your spirit can be strengthened as you commune with God. God bless you. Have a great day and a week. Bless you. Bye for now.